Under a blood-orange sky and with a scorching desert wind whipping through her hair, Catalina Reyes sprinted along a cracked dirt road, barefoot, with her swollen belly a silent testament to hope and danger. Behind her, the cruel shouts of outlaws echoed, and the threat of a misplaced gunshot was constant. In that desperate moment, as dust and fear fused in the fading light, a solitary silhouette on a sturdy horse emerged from the horizon, offering a chance at salvation. This was the day that would change everything. The year was 1886, and the arid lands of Red Mesa, Arizona, bore witness to lives shaped by hardship and defiance. Catalina Reyes, once the cherished wife of an outlaw whose name was whispered only in shadowy corners, now found herself branded as an outcast, a pregnant widow on the run. Her husband had been slain in a brutal ambush by his own gang, and in the ensuing chaos, his former cohorts now hunted her with single-minded ruthlessness. They believed she held secrets to a hidden treasure, a secret that could expose their ill-gotten gains. With every hard step along the barren trail, Catalina felt the weight of betrayal and sorrow keenly, yet within her burned a quiet determination to protect the legacy of her unborn child. For months, Catalina had concealed her identity behind a veil of shame and sorrow, enduring endless torment in a cruel household once overseen by her late husband's brutal associates. Now, with eyes rimmed red from endless terror and hope dwindling like the last drops of rain in the scorched land, she had made the impossible choice to flee. With only the ragged remnants of her past keeping her company, a faded brooch inherited from her mother and a locket that nearly slipped from her grasp, she ran. The desert, unyielding and stark, offered little comfort, its silence both a refuge and a reminder of the loneliness that had defined her life. As Catalina's feet pounded the sun-baked earth, distant shouts and the clatter of hooves grew louder from behind her. The outlaws, draped in threadbare coats and hearts hardened by cruelty, were not far behind. Their pursuit was relentless. Each thundering step of her pursuers filled her with dread, yet also steeled her resolve. She could no longer hide in the errors of her past. With every ragged breath, she vowed to fight for a new beginning, a future in which a child would know kindness rather than cruelty. Exhausted and bleeding from a shallow cut on her arm, a remnant of her desperate escape, Catalina's vision blurred. Her legs threatened to give way under the relentless demands of the dusty trail. Just as hope seemed to wane, a distant sound reached her ears that was different from the clamor of her pursuers. The steady, confident beat of a horse's hooves, approaching like the promise of sanctuary. Gritting her teeth against fatigue and pain, she dared to glance over her shoulder. There, emerging from the heat-hazed horizon, was a figure astride a magnificent, dark horse. The rider was a man whose presence exuded quiet authority and strength. His broad-brimmed hat cast a shadow over eyes that burned with steady, protective light. Clad in fine, well-tailored rancher's attire that spoke of a wealth built on blood and honor, he seemed to glide effortlessly through the dust and chaos, a beacon amid a storm of despair. The stranger did not slow his pace as he approached. Instead, he spurred his steed onward with a single, decisive gesture. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Catalina felt a stir in her chest, a mix of trepidation and a sudden, inexplicable hope. Was this a rescuer sent by fate? Her heart leapt with the possibility, halting just a fraction of her desperate flight. The rider finally drew alongside her on the narrow trail. His voice, low and measured as if weighed by years of hardship, broke the silence. "Miss Reyes, hold on. I'm here to help." His tone was neither brash nor overly familiar. It was a calming assurance of a man who had seen enough to know that true kindness was rare along these unforgiving trails. For a long, suspended moment, Catalina could only stare, her eyes wide as her pulse pounded. In that brief instant, the horrors of the past, the cruel lash of her late husband's gang, the bitter whispers of betrayal, seemed to recede, replaced by an almost imperceptible promise of refuge. With trembling resolve, she nodded, barely able to form words. I don't know if I can trust," she managed in a whisper that carried both fear and hope. The man inclined his head slightly. You need not speak now. Trust is earned through action, not words. With gentle urgency, he extended his hand, and, as if caught in slow motion, Catalina placed her hand in his. At that moment, as the warmth of his grip seeped into her chilled skin, the desert's burning gloom seemed to lift ever so slightly. The sound of pursuit grew louder, and the distant riders surged closer behind her. The mysterious rancher did not pause. He pulled her quickly from her faltering steps and guided her to the side of his horse. "Climb on," he said firmly. "There's no time to lose." With a ragged exhale that mingled both desperation and relief, Catalina climbed aboard, clutching her locket as if to hold her entire fragile world together. The powerful horse carried them forward, bounding along the dusty trail, at a pace that matched the racing sound of the outlaws. Behind them, the guilt, cruelty, and terror of her past shrank into a dark, receding blur. As the pair sped away, dust swirling behind them like ghostly shrouds, Catalina's mind raced. Who was this man, and what promise did his arrival hold? His name was not yet spoken, but his eyes had the depth of a man burdened with secrets and haunted memories, perhaps not unlike her own. Somewhere deep in her heart, amid the terror and loss, flickered the possibility of redemption, of discovering a new name for herself that was not defined by what had been taken from her. In the fleeting moments as the rider guided his horse along a less-traveled desert path, the distant glint of pursuit began to fade. Yet even as the immediate danger receded, Catalina found herself unable to escape the uncertainty of her future. Was she now safe from the relentless Ashcroft enforcers who sought to silence her for the sake of their own dark treasures? And what of the man who had rescued her? His arrival seemed fated, an answer to a prayer uttered in the depths of despair. The rider eventually slowed as they approached a pastoral valley where the land softened into a modest ranch, the estate of a man whose wealth and reputation whispered through the saloons of nearby towns. The ranch buildings, standing resolute against the harsh desert sun, glowed with an unexpected warmth. As they neared the entrance, the rider spurred his horse to a gentle stop, turning toward Catalina with a gaze that was both questioning and kind. "Miss Reyes," he began, his voice firm yet gentle, "this is my place. You can rest here, and let our names be forever entwined by honor and protection." His words, solemn and layered with promise, held an almost ritualistic weight, a declaration that the sanctuary of his estate offered not just refuge, but a new identity. Catalina's breath caught. The implications of his offer were immense. To be taken in as one of family, to share in the legacy of protection and hard-won hope, was a notion both terrifying and wondrous. She reached up slowly, gingerly brushing the faded stamp on her locket, a keepsake from a lifelong lost, and wondered if this new man, with his steady eyes and quiet nobility, might be the key to reclaiming not just her safety, but her dignity as well. But as the rancher opened the grand weathered door to his homestead, the sound of distant hoofbeats stirred the stillness once more. From the far side of the valley, dark figures emerged on the horizon, a final ominous reminder that the Ashcroft enforcers were still hunting her. The rescuer's protective gaze darkened for a heartbeat as he noticed the figures, and he quickly closed the door behind them. Inside, the promise of a new life hung thick in the air, mingling with the persistent dread of what might follow beyond these walls. Catalina's heart pounded as the ranch doors sealed their temporary sanctuary. The rancher turned toward her, his expression a mix of resolute determination and the weight of unspoken sorrows. "You're safe for now, but we must prepare," he said quietly, his tone both comforting and cautionary. In that moment, the promise of sanctuary was shadowed by yet another threat. Outside, the relentless pursuit of her past still loomed, a final echo of the cruelty that had defined her existence. As she stood on the threshold of this new sanctuary, Catalina wondered what price freedom would demand, and if she had the strength to reclaim her future. The echoes of pursuit and the threats that followed her seemed distant yet lingering, like the fading howl of a desert wind. With trembling resolve and the weight of hope in her heart, she stepped further into the ranch, not knowing if her journey toward redemption was about to begin, or if the shadows of her past would come calling once more. With the ranch door closed against the encroaching threat and a promise of a new identity on the horizon, Catalina's uncertain future waits. Will the safety of the sanctuary be enough to outlast the dark legacies pursuing her? The heavy wooden door of the ranch swung shut with a resonant thud, plunging Catalina Reyes and her rescuer into an uneasy sanctuary. Outside, the desert wind carried faint sounds, distant hoofbeats and the murmurs of those who pursued, reminding them that danger still lurked on the horizon. Inside, the modest interior of the ranch at Red Mesa, Arizona, offered little in luxury, but plenty in refuge. The air was cool and tinged with the scent of cedarwood and leather, a welcome contrast to the punishing heat of the desert. Catalina's heart still pounded from her desperate escape, and as she tried to steady her breathing, her fingers instinctively clutched the faded silver locket that had once belonged to her mother. That locket, a small but potent relic of a past filled with both love and loss, now served as a talisman, a reminder that she was more than a fugitive. In the dim glow of an oil lamp, her eyes roamed the room. The walls were adorned with simple, time-worn photographs and faded maps, and every creak of the wooden floor seemed to echo the promise of a fresh start. Yet, even here, she could not entirely shake the terror of being hunted. From a shadowed doorway emerged a man whose presence seemed to command the stillness. He stepped forward with a deliberate, measured gait. His features were etched with quiet strength and sorrow, hints of past tragedies visible in the lines carved across his face. "I am Elias Ward," he said softly, his voice low and resolute, imbued with a gentle authority. "You're safe here for now, Miss Reyes, but we must remain vigilant. I don't take these matters lightly." Catalina studied him, noting how his dark, steady eyes bore into hers, not with prying curiosity, but with protective warmth reminiscent of a long-forgotten home. His presence brought solace in a way that quiet gestures often do. The slight nod he offered as he secured a window, and the careful way he handed her a clean linen cloth to wrap her injured arm spoke volumes. In that moment, she began to sense that perhaps this sanctuary could indeed be a haven from the cruelty of her past. Outside, the sound of pursuit did not entirely vanish. Elias had already taken measures. He had dispatched Ike, a lean and cautious ranch hand known for his sharp eyes and silent loyalty, to keep watch over the perimeter. Ike had vanished into the dusky twilight, leaving behind a few whispered assurances. The Ashcroft enforcers were close, but not yet at the door. This information, delivered in hushed urgency, sent a tremor of unease through Catalina. It was an unmistakable reminder that her ordeal was far from over. After ensuring that the immediate threat outside was held at bay, at least for now, Elias guided Catalina into a small sitting room at the back of the ranch. The room was sparse, its only comforts being a sturdy wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a single, flickering lantern that cast wavering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. "Rest if you can," Elias urged gently as he left her a warm cup of weak coffee. "I've secured the perimeter, but we must be cautious. They're persistent." His tone was calm and measured, a beacon of quiet strength that bolstered Catalina's resolve. As Catalina sipped the bitter liquid, her thoughts wandered to the desert she had just escaped. Each scorch of wind, each cruel taunt of pursuit, now mingling with fragile hopes for recovery in this unyielding landscape. The ranch, with its creaking beams and dusty floors, was a refuge, but it was built on the lands where memories of a broken past still lingered. She traced her finger along the cool surface of the locket, feeling its worn edges and imagining the secrets it might hold. Secrets of love, defiance, and perhaps a promise of a future that was yet to be written. Slowly, through the haze of exhaustion and trepidation, Catalina began to put pieces of her life together. When she gathered the courage to rise, she assisted with small tasks around the ranch, a quiet endeavor that slowly fortified her sense of agency. She helped mend the sagging fence, her hands steadying as she hammered away at each loose board, and she tended a small garden of cacti and wildflowers, whose stubborn resilience in the arid soil mirrored her own inner strength. Each modest act of care was a declaration that she would not be defined solely by her past, that she was beginning to claim her own future. Yet, Just as moments of cautious peace began to settle over the ranch, a faint disruption shattered the calm. Late into the night, as Catalina sat by the lantern and gently rewrapped her arm with a clean cloth, a soft but urgent knock sounded at the side door. At first, the sound was masked by the distant lament of wind whistling through cracked windows, but it soon grew distinct, a rhythmic, measured tapping that could only be one thing: someone recognizing her name. With her heart pounding anew, she exchanged a wary look with Elias, who had been quietly reviewing some documents at a nearby desk. His eyes flickered with concern. "Stay here," he instructed in a tone that brooked no argument. "I'll handle this." Elias moved slowly toward the door, each step deliberate in the quiet that had now turned oppressive. As he cracked open the door, the dim light revealed a solitary figure standing in the shadows, a young ranch hand with a nervous glance and a well-worn satchel hanging at his side. "Mr. Ward." The hand began hesitantly. I found something you need to see." His voice wavered, laced with the tension of a secret barely contained. Elias's brow furrowed as a hand stepped back and opened his satchel to reveal a small, folded piece of paper. The note, crumpled and damp with sweat, was scrawled in hurried handwriting that spoke of desperation. "They say you're harboring Catalina Reyes," the note read, followed by a terse warning. "The Ashcroft demand a return or the consequences will be dire." The message was signed with a symbol, a crude, angular mark that Calder had seen before on wanted posters in the dusty corners of Coyote Ridge's saloons. Instinctively, a chill ran down Catalina's spine. The note was not just a threat, but a declaration that something or someone inside the ranch might have betrayed her whereabouts, or that the Ashcroft enforcers were drawing closer than she had feared. "Elias," she whispered as he stepped back into the room with the note clenched in his fist. "What does this mean?" Her voice trembled between hope and anxiety. He regarded her quietly, his eyes dark with unspoken memories and the weight of personal loss. "It means our sanctuary is compromised," he replied softly. "We must be ever more cautious now. The Ashcrofts, they leave no stone unturned." His tone was measured, yet every syllable carried the gravity of his past, a past filled with unforgiving betrayal and unresolved heartbreak. His words, spoken in a hushed near darkness, blended with the desert's sorrowful winds. As the night deepened outside, a new tension emerged within the ranch walls. Catalina's newfound sense of hope was now tempered by the stark reality that her pursuers were closer than ever, perhaps aided by those who recognized her name or knew her face despite her desperate flight. In that small, flickering room, the delicate bond between her and Elias solidified further. With each whispered reassurance and every shared glance, their mutual determination to defy the oppressive forces took root. The ranch, with its creaking wood and quiet warmth, was not just a shelter. It was a symbol of the possibility of redemption and new beginnings. The cold desert night had not yet yielded fully to the coming dawn, but shadows began to stir with uneasy movement along the ranch's outer walls. A faint scrape at the far window and a murmur in the dark hinted at further trouble. Catalina felt her pulse quickened, a reminder that the past was never far behind. As she clutched her locket, she sensed a personal imperative stirring within her. She would no longer allow herself to be a passive victim of fate. With a hesitant yet deliberate resolve, she whispered under her breath, "I will keep what is mine, come what may." Even as Elias prepared to send another lookout out with instructions to double his vigilance, there came another signal, a distant, nearly imperceptible cry that none of them could quite place. Was it merely the wind, or a call of alarm from somewhere beyond the ranch's protective circle? The uncertainty wrapped around the room like a shroud, intensifying the uneasy silence. In that charged moment, with hearts heavy yet hopeful, the question loomed large. Who among them had already betrayed the sanctuary, if indeed betrayal was at work, and what further threat would the Ashcrofts soon bring to bear? Catalina's eyes, shining with both determination and fear, met Elias's as the flickering lamp cast long, jittering shadows. The note lay open on the table, a stark, damning proof of external menace. Outside, The desert whispered secrets through the crevices of the ranch, hinting that their hard-won refuge might not be as hidden as they hoped. The night stretched on, each minute fraught with uncertainty and the promise of danger. As the ranch fell silent again, every creak of old wood and every distant sound seemed to press in from beyond. With a final, weighted sigh, Elias tucked the note away and resolved silently that they would face whatever came next together. But even as a tentative calm settled over the small room, a final, chilling murmur from the darkness outside indicated that the Ashcroft legacy was far from defeated. As the desert winds stir new and distant voices murmur secrets beyond the walls, Catalina and Elias are left to wonder. Will their fragile sanctuary survive the fallout of betrayal and a renewed assault from the relentless Ashcrofts? The night was still heavy with uncertainty when Catalina Reyes stirred from a fitful sleep. Moonlight filtered weakly through the narrow window of the modest sitting room, casting jagged shadows along the worn wooden floor. Every creak of the ranch's timbers set her heart aflutter with anxious remembrance of that ominous note and the faint cry that had shattered the fragile calm of the previous hours. As she clutched her treasured locket, a worn silver pendant passed down through generations. Catalina could almost feel its cool metal steady her racing pulse. She knew that the threat had not yet passed. The Ashcroft enforcers were out there, lurking like specters, and the possibility of betrayal within her newfound sanctuary loomed just as large. Elias Ward had been alert all through the night. From his quiet vigil by the door, he had listened to the unsettled murmurs and the distant echo of voices that seemed to whisper betrayal. Now, as dawn threatened to break over the vast, bleeding skies of Red Mesa, he quietly approached Catalina. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, met hers with an intensity that spoke of both concern and unwavering resolve. "Rest is short tonight," he said in a tone that was measured and low. "I'm going out to see what stirs near the perimeter." His voice, though soft, resonated with protective authority that reassured, even as it deepened the weight of the situation. Catalina's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her longed to hide and let the past remain a dark stain, but another part, one that had slowly been nurtured by Elias's steady kindness, demanded that she stand and face what came next. "I want to come with you," she whispered, surprised at herself as much as him. Her words, though tentative, were imbued with a newfound strength, a spark of defiance that she had not known she possessed. As if reading her soul, Elias studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Stay close," he instructed, "and be vigilant." In the quiet before the inevitable storm of confrontation, the connection between them deepened, a shared determination born of loss and forged in the crucible of danger. Together, they stepped outside into the cool desert night. The ranch was cloaked in silver under the moon's ghostly glow. Every familiar detail, the creaking of the barn's old doors, the rustle of wind across the dry earth, and the distant howl of a lone coyote, seemed imbued with both promise and peril. Elias led the way along a narrow trail, winding through the ranch's perimeter. His careful steps and the soft clatter of his boots were the only sounds that accompanied them, until they reached a small clearing behind the main house. It was there that they discovered the source of the disturbance. Huddled near the edge of a weathered shed stood a young ranch hand, his eyes wide with alarm and guilt. He trembled visibly, his hand shaking as he fumbled with a scrap of paper that had dropped from his pocket, a piece of the very note that had set the night's events in motion. Catalina's heart tightened as she recognized the familiar hurried scrawl of the Ashcroft threat. The note spelled out a clear message. A trusted member of the ranch was passing on information about her whereabouts. Betrayal stung sharper than any bullet. Elias stepped forward, his hand tight on the rifle that hung at his hip. "Who else is you talking?" he demanded, his voice as cold and resolute as the desert wind. The ranch hand, caught between fear and the desperate need for absolution, stammered, I was only trying to warn you. I thought it best if you knew. They're planning something at the old trading post. They say it's more than just a simple recapture." His voice trailed off as he cast his eyes downward, shame painting his features. Catalina felt a surge of indignation. She had risked everything to escape a brutal past, only to have betrayal lurk inside the sanctuary that had promised her safety. In that moment, she clutched her locket as if to draw strength from its silvery memory. Stepping forward, her voice rang clear in the hush of the desert night. "It is not enough that I hide from those who haunt me. I will no longer be a pawn in your games." Her words, airy yet determined, broke through the tension like a gust of wind. Elias's steady gaze softened slightly at her declaration. "We will discover who betrayed us and put an end to this," he assured her. His tone, though resolute, carried hints of his own deep-seated pain. Silent secrets of a past marred by loss that he rarely spoke of. The ranch hand's fearful eyes darted away as he realized his treacherous act had been witnessed. Elias motioned him to step aside and, with a measured motion, confiscated the scrap of paper. The betrayal was not the only threat, however. The note also warned of a larger Ashcroft presence gathering at the old trading post, a sinister plan that would expose Catalina and tear apart the fragile sanctuary they were laboring so hard to build. Returning to the main house with the disloyal hand and his evidence, Elias led Catalina into the dining area, where a few loyal ranch hands had gathered during the tumult of the night. The heavy wooden table, scarred by years of hardship, now bore the weight of responsibility and suspicion. In hushed voices, the men discussed the gravity of the note and the implications that the Ashcrofts were not only watching, but actively conspiring to reclaim their prized fugitive. Catalina sat at the edge of the table, her fingers idly tracing the delicate pattern on her locket, as if drawing courage from its familiar shine. In that reflective moment, the rancher and his trusted allies formulated a plan. It was clear that their sanctuary was compromised if the Ashcroft threat was left to fester. They decided to secure the ranch further and, if necessary, send a trusted messenger to warn nearby allies and call for reinforcements. Elias's eyes, burning with quiet determination, met Catalina's. "We must act swiftly," he said in a low whisper. "If they move out at the trading post, we may face a full-scale assault before dawn." As the night deepened further, wind swept across the ranch, whispering secrets of approaching peril. Catalina's thoughts flitted between memories of her former life, haunted hushed conversations in the oppressive Ashcroft household, and the new possibilities that beckoned from within these protective walls. Her gaze lingered on the locket, a bittersweet relic that had long symbolized sorrow, which now pulsed with a renewed message of hope and defiance. Taking a deep breath, she rose. "I will not be defined by the past," she declared, her voice steadying with newfound conviction. "I choose to fight to take charge of the future that is mine." Her words, both soft and resolute, elicited nods from the gathered men. Even Ike, whose silent loyalty had always spoken louder than words, offered a brief, approving smile. A sudden sound at the far end of the house, like the scraping of metal on wood, interrupted the murmurs. All head turned toward the sound. Elias's eyes narrowed as he reached for his rifle. The sound, now obviously the clatter of footsteps, wasn't coming from outside, but from within the compound itself. "Stay alert," he ordered quietly, eyes scanning the darkened corridors. Catalina's heart pounded as she clutched her locket tighter. Had the traitor's warning been just beginning? Was there an infiltrator among them? Someone whose loyalty was as fleeting as a desert wind? The tension in the room mounted as footsteps echoed closer through a side door. One of the ranch hands, a wiry man with a nervous twitch known as Silas, stepped into the lamplight. His eyes darted anxiously around the room. I thought I heard someone," he stammered, voice barely audible. His admission sent a ripple of unease through the assembly. Catalina exchanged a worried glance with Elias, and for a long moment, silence reigned as tense faces took on expressions of betrayal and fear. Elias motioned for Silas to follow him. "Come along quietly. We need to know if our sanctuary has been compromised further," he said, his tone even but laced with authority. As they left the room, Catalina felt a cold knot of apprehension descend within her. The sound of Silas's timid footsteps faded, leaving behind the uncertainty of a traitor's whisper buried within their midst. Left alone in the quiet dining area, Catalina's eyes searched the faces of the loyal men gathered. The realization was harsh and sudden. The fight was not just against the Ashcroft enforcers on the outside, but potentially from within. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the locket, the one symbol that had already borne witness to her transformation. With every pulse, she vowed silently that she would not be a victim of fate any longer. This sanctuary, this newfound family, was her chance to reclaim her identity and shape her own destiny. Just then, a hurried commotion came from the far end of the ranch. Voices rose sharply, filled with alarm. A fresh chorus of angry shouts and the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps signaled that the Ashcrofts had not only been watching, but were now moving swiftly toward the ranch itself. Catalina's breath caught as Elias re-entered the room, an urgent glint in his eyes. "They're coming again," he said, voice low and resolute. "And this time, it may be more than just scouts." His words reverberated in the charged silence, and the weight of the threat settled heavily upon them all. As the first echoes of footsteps reverberated along the ranch's dusty corridors, Catalina clutched her locket and looked up at Elias. In that moment, their eyes met, a silent pact of mutual trust and shared determination passing between them. The sanctuary they had built was tenuous, but it was theirs to fight for. With heavy hearts yet resolved spirits, they prepared for the next chapter of a battle that promised to test the very foundation of their newfound hope. With both betrayal from within and the ominous promise of fresh Ashcroft enforcers echoing through the corrugated wood, Catalina and Elias braced themselves. Will the sanctuary hold, or will the darkness reclaim them? The tense murmur in the dining hall had barely faded when the faint sound of a restless footstep on the creaking boards signaled that the traitor's presence could no longer be ignored. In the dim glow of the lantern, Elias Ward exchanged a grave look with Catalina Reyes. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension. Every sound was a reminder that the sanctuary they had so carefully built might be compromised within as much as without. Elias moved silently toward a narrow corridor near the rear of the ranch, where the murmuring had come from. Catalina, unwilling to be a passive victim any longer, followed closely, her hand still clasping the silver locket that had once been a fragile relic of her past and now pulsed with quiet defiance. As they advanced, the sound of whispered voices and furtive shuffling grew louder. There, huddled against the far wall, was Silas, one of the ranch hands whose anxious eyes betrayed his guilt. His hands trembled as though burdened by a secret too heavy to bear. "Silas," Elias said, his tone low but laced with icy authority, "explain yourself." The word was simple, yet it cut through the murmur like a sharpened blade. Silas's eyes darted between them. He hesitated, then in a shaky voice muttered, I meant no harm. I was afraid. The Ashcrofts, they made me promise. I only want to protect my own skin." His confession, a pitiful admission of fear and cowardice, filled the corridor with a sickening tension. Catalina's heart pounded. The betrayal stung, but as her eyes wandered over Silas's stricken face, she recognized not only deceit, but the fear of a man trapped by forces far larger than himself. Yet, the warning on the note was unmistakable. The Ashcrofts were prepared to strike next to the old trading post, a position that would ensure no one could hide from their reach. "You've sold us out," she spat, her tone trembling between fury and despair. "Or worse, you've been forced to betray us." Silas's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't have a choice," he whimpered. "They threatened my family. I'm sorry." His words fell into the heavy silence, met only by a disapproving glare from Elias. Without another word, the rancher signaled that Silas would be detained until they could decide his fate. Elias's steady resolve had grown only firmer with each passing betrayal, a bitter reminder of his own past losses, a family once torn apart by treachery that he had vowed never to repeat. Before long, muffled sounds from outside reached them again, drawing their attention back to the threat beyond the walls. The persistent clatter of hooves and the low murmurs of voices, carried on the chilly desert wind, suggested that the Ashcroft enforcers were regrouping for another assault. Elias returned to the main room with Silas in tow and a grim expression on his weathered face. "We must fortify our defenses," he pronounced, his voice quiet but resonant. "They are coming, and I fear this time they're not only after you but all of us." Catalina, her pulse still racing, nodded with determination. In that moment, she realized that her journey had shifted from mere survival to active resistance. Her hand, pressed firmly against the locket, felt like a talisman that anchored her the hope she now clutched as dearly as her freedom. "I refuse to cower in fear anymore," she declared softly, her voice rising with confidence. "I will fight for my child, for myself, and for the future that I deserve." Elias's eyes softened with a glimmer of approval, a rare moment of vulnerability from the stoic rancher. "You speak like a true daughter of this land," he said, his tone almost gentle, and for a moment, Catalina saw hints of past regrets and untold losses behind his steady gaze. "Together, we'll show them that we are not to be pushed aside." In the following hours, as the blue darkness of night deepened, Elias and the loyal ranch hands worked feverishly to reinforce the ranch's defenses. They positioned extra barricades along the exposed windows and doubled the watch near the main door. The scent of gunpowder mixed with the lingering aroma of leather and sweat, and every creak would instill a sense of urgency. Catalina, having emerged from her fears, assisted by carrying supplies and passing tools, proving that her strength was growing with each passing moment. Her hands, once delicate and trembling, now moved with purpose as she helped secure a makeshift trap near the back corridor, a symbolic act that echoed the assertion of her newfound agency. Outside, the relentless desert quiet was shattered by the sound of a single, piercing whistle, a signal unmistakably leading to the anticipated attack. The whistle echoed across the sandy expanse, reverberating through the night. Elias's jaw tensed as he gathered the men. Even Silas watched in the shadows, his earlier confession adding a bitter edge to the tense atmosphere. "Steady now," Elias commanded. His voice boomed over the rising tumult, as he peered through a grimy window to catch sight of figures emerging from the gloom. The Ashcroft enforcers were coming in force, their silhouettes growing nearer under a sky spattered with stars and the occasional flash of distant lightning. As the first of the riders reached the ridge bordering the ranch, a fierce, terrifying reality descended. Catalina, standing by Elias on the creaking porch, inhaled deeply as the harsh wind whipped dust into their eyes. In that moment, the ranch, a place of newfound hope and tenuous trust, was put to its ultimate test. "I'm ready," she said, emerging from a well of courage that astounded even herself. Her voice was steady and resolute now, a battle cry tempered by grief and hope. Elias's face, usually composed and reserved, betrayed a flicker of pain as memories of his own shattered past surfaced, but he quickly masked them with determination. "We hold this line," he declared, his eyes mirroring the fire in his soul. With practiced precision, the defenders took their positions. The flicker of lamplight mingled with the first tentative gunfire. The sound rang out sharply against the silence. In that single heavy moment, the weight of their combined histories, the betrayals, the losses, the desperate struggles, transformed into a collective vow of defiance. The ensuing assault was both fierce and swift. Out of the darkness came the Ashcroft enforcers, their guns blazing and their demands echoing on the wind. "Surrender, Catalina!" their leader bellowed, his tone filled with unyielding menace. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to suspend as bullets zipped past, and the air burned with the scent of gunpowder and fear. Catalina's hand tightened around her locket, and she stepped forward in defiance. The clamor of conflict roared around her as she drew herself up, determined not to be taken back into that hell. In an act that crystallized her transformation from frightened widow to empowered woman, Catalina grabbed hold of a weathered rifle that lay among the ranch supplies, her trembling fingers now steady with resolve. "I am not yours to command," she declared, her voice rising above the chaos. Her bold, declarative words punctured the tension, reinforcing her newfound agency. The Ashcroft enforcers hesitated, their snarls faltering as they realized the fire of rebellion burning in her eyes. Seizing the moment, Elias stepped forward. With a measured, powerful gesture, he declared, "Catalina Reyes is now under my protection, and she is my kin." His words, though simple, resonated deeply to the heart of every defender. In that moment, the ranch transformed not only into a physical sanctuary, but into an emblem of reborn identity and defiant hope. His declaration rang through the tumult, binding them together in a silent pact to resist the relentless cruelty of the past. As the battle raged on outside, the rebels rallied around the pair, allies from neighboring properties. Spurred by the promise of justice and the sight of a woman finally taking hold of her destiny, emerged from the shadows. The enforcers, caught in a web of unified resistance and staggering determination, began to falter under combined assault. Gunshots, fierce shouts, and the determined rhythm of survival clashed in a symphony that echoed off the red-hued walls of the ranch. Yet even as victory seemed to be within their grasp, an unforeseen chill swept through the defenders. In the midst of the battle's crescendo, as the last of the aggressive riders began to retreat, a low, menacing voice echoed from the darkness beyond the ridge. "This isn't the end." The voice sneered, a final, ominous promise that the Ashcroft legacy would not be so easily defeated. For a moment, the determined expressions on the faces of Elias, Catalina, and their allies faltered. The threat was far from vanquished. In that critical, heart-stopping instant, silence reigned as each whispered the name of the enemy, Ashcroft. Catalina's eyes shone with a mixture of fear and fierce determination as she clutched her locket, its gentle gleam a quiet counterpoint to the dark promise of vengeance in the night. Elias stepped beside her, his voice soft yet filled with unwavering assurance. "We have won tonight, but their shadow lingers. We must remain ever vigilant." His words, echoing his own haunted past, carried the weight not only of his personal loss, but a collective hope that the future could be made bright, if only they remained united. A final, lingering moment passed as the sound of retreat mixed with the rising whispers of an unknown new threat. Outside, the desert wind carried with it the promise of another encounter, another test of the sanctuary they had built. And as the first blush of dawn began to seep into the scarlet horizon, the defenders knew that despite the victory, the struggle for freedom was far from over. As the valley is bathed in the tentative light of dawn, the lingering voice of the Ashcrofts and the promise of another threat leave Catalina and Elias questioning. Will their newfound sanctuary hold against the darkness still closing in from beyond? At the break of a tender dawn over Red Mesa, the ranch stood quiet amid the lingering echoes of battle. The final assault by the Ashcroft enforcers had ended not with a roar of violence, but with a resolute stand by the united defenders. In the cool morning light, Elias Ward and his loyal ranch hands had driven the last of the outlaws back beyond the ridge. Their renewed efforts, bolstered by the unexpected arrival of a small contingent of neighboring ranchers and townsfolk who had heard Elias's silent plea for help, had finally neutralized the immediate threat. The men and women of the community rallied together, their voices low and determined, until the menacing presence of the Ashcrofts was nothing more than a dark memory on the horizon. Catalina Reyes, once a frightened, pregnant fugitive, now stood tall in the soft glow of the early sunrise, her face radiant with the fierce light of hope. The dust of conflict still clung to her weathered clothes, but her eyes shone with a spark that had been long concealed. Beside her, Elias, whose steely resolve and quiet heroism had become her safeguard, placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. In that moment, his gaze, usually reserved and haunted by the ghost of a lost past, brimmed with affirmation. "You are safe now," he murmured, his words carrying the weight of shared pain and the promise of redemption. The decisive clash had not come without sacrifice. Silas, the traitorous ranch hand whose guilt had been laid bare, had been confined, and he now faced the stern judgment of both the community and his own conscience. Yet even in his ignominy, he offered a weary apology, a final, shame confession that his actions had nearly cost him everything. His fate would be sealed by the community's justice, ensuring that the legacy of betrayal would not again mar their sanctuary. As the last of the Ashcroft enforcers was driven off, a new sound began to swell across the ranch, a soft, rhythmic cry that rose from the humble stable. In the quiet that followed the tumult of battle, the sound of a newborn's cry pierced the still air. It was a sound so unexpectedly tender amid the harsh reality of the frontier that it seemed almost miraculous, a living symbol of new life and rebirth. Catalina's eyes welled with tears for reasons both joyous and bittersweet. In that vulnerable moment, her body, which had so long borne the burdens of sorrow and uncertainty, prepared to welcome a new life, a beacon amid all the darkness. Elias hurried to her side as he sensed a change in her. "Catalina," he whispered, his voice soft. "Now is the time." Beside a makeshift cradle in a quiet corner of the ranch house, an old rocking chair repurposed with care and love, the community gathered in respectful hush. With their support, Catalina found the strength to face the final chapter of her arduous journey. Moments stretched, heavy with anticipation. As sweat mixed with tears on her determined face, Catalina breathed deeply. She gripped her silver locket, the same locket that had once tied her to painful memories, and closed her eyes. In that symbolic act, she made a silent vow to let the weight of the past fall away. The labor was arduous and filled with tension, yet was also a fierce testament to her resilience. With Elias' steady encouragement and the gentle presence of a wise, older woman named Clara, a figure revered on the ranch for her kind guidance and nurturing heart, Catalina weathered the pain. The ranch fell silent, except for the soft murmur of supportive words and the rhythmic pulse of the frontier night outside. As the hours passed in a blur of both agony and wonder, Catalina's strength blossomed into something deeply transformative. Finally, just before the first blush of dawn, a cry echoed from within, a cry that resonated to the hearts of all who had gathered. In that transcendent moment, Catalina cradled her newborn child in her arms. The baby's first wail was both a declaration of life and an act of defiant hope. Surrounded by gentle faces and warm embraces, Catalina's transformation became complete. No longer defined solely by her past as a fugitive or by the cruelty that had once sought to enslave her, she now held in her arms a future. Someone whose life was destined to carry forth a legacy of resilience and compassion. With trembling joy, she looked up at Elias, whose silent smile and solemn nod conveyed that his promise had been honored. "This child," she murmured, her voice strong yet tender, "is our future. From the ashes of our struggle, we have built a legacy of love." The symbolic power of the moment was not lost on anyone. As the newborn cried and the first rays of the rising sun spilled gold over the rugged horizon, Catalina took one final, deliberate step toward a new beginning. She removed the silver locket from around her neck and set it gently in the palm of her infant's tiny hand. To her, the locket was no longer a chain binding her to a history of pain. It was now a memento of how far she'd come, a cherished relic of the past, safely passed on like a blessing for the future. With that act, Catalina symbolically let go of the dark memories that had plagued her, affirming her birth as both a physical and emotional rebirth. Around the ranch, the community began to stir in the warmth of a fledgling morning. Old wounds slowly began to mend as neighbors shared quiet words of encouragement and helped rebuild what had once been nearly razed by the relentless enforcers of the Ashcrofts. Elias and his trusted allies labored side by side, reinforcing fences, tending to wounded, and preparing for the inevitable challenges ahead. Despite the scars of battle, every repaired board and every healed bruise marked a victory over the tyranny that had long loomed over Red Mesa. In a quiet moment, as the sun climbed higher, Elias stepped onto the newly mended porch and surveyed the ranch with contemplative gaze. Memories of his own lost family, a pair of bright eyes and a loving smile, swirled in his mind. Yet now, in the face of renewed hope and triumphant arrival of new life, those painful recollections receded into the background. His heart, at long last, could harbor a glimmer of peace. "We have forged something precious here," he thought silently, realizing that the ranch was no longer merely a refuge from darkness. It had become a home, a haven built upon courage, trust, and the undying light of redemption. As the morning wore on and the community gathered to celebrate the newborn, Catalina and Elias shared a quiet conversation beneath a sprawling mesquite tree. The conversation was sparse and filled with unspoken understanding, a glimpse of the future they both longed for. Catalina's eyes, once haunted by despair, now shone with determination and gentle pride. "I choose a new name for this new life," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her hard-won resolve. "From now on, I will no longer be defined by my pain, but by what I build and protect." Elias nodded solemnly, the lines of sorrow on his face softening with hope. Though the Ashcroft threat had been subdued by the combined might of the community, the dark cloud of their legacy still lingered like a distant storm. And yet, within the safe arms of the ranch and the warmth of shared victories, Catalina realized that while the past may cast long shadows, it is the light of new beginnings that ultimately prevails. With the promise of a brighter future etched into every corner of the ranch, a sense of renewal pulsed through the air. The gentle cry of the newborn, the rhythmic clanging of hammers mending broken wood, and the soft murmur of survivors sharing quiet hope all coalesced into a singular vision. From the ashes of their struggle, they had forged not only a sanctuary, but a legacy of love and perseverance. As the sun rose higher over the scarlet hills of Red Mesa, bathing the rugged landscape in a hopeful glow, Catalina cradled her child close and looked toward the horizon with resolute heart. Her new identity, reclaimed through quiet defiance and nurtured by the steadfast loyalty of Elias Ward and her newfound family, promised that the future was hers to shape. Yet, beneath the calm of that triumphant day lay the reminder that the remnants of the Ashcrofts still lingered in the whispers of the wind. And as the ranch buzzed with gentle celebration, the distant cry of a lone coyote sounded, a lingering echo of a threat that might one day return. As the promise of dawn illuminates the ranch and the serene community gathers to celebrate hope, the soft call of a coyote in the distance reminds Catalina and Elias that the ultimate battle between light and darkness is never truly over. Thank you for joining us on this journey through hardship and hope here in the Wild West. If Catalina's transformation and the power of found family inspired you, please subscribe for more tales of grit and redemption. Don't forget to hit the bell, like, and share your thoughts below. What moment spoke to your heart the most? Stay tuned for more inspiring frontier stories.